Hi, so this is a video on my channel. I've finished my wine, so yeah, anyway. So this is kind of like a new segment. This is kind of like Mandy's Nostalgia Corner. So my comic, what I really loved back in the 80s when I was 14, 15, 16 was a Marvel comic. I know that's unusual with the amount of bashing you give Marvel nowadays, but back in the 80s and 90s, Marvel, I loved them big time. I love them big time. And the one that really got me because of the age I was New Mutants by Chris Claremont and initially by Bob McLeod. So I got this week for a really good price, £16. And now in the UK, this normally goes for about £32, £33 because it's quite a chunky book. It's got the first 12 issues. It's got the graphic novel. This was when Marvel did big 48-page, 64-page graphic novels, a bit like the Prestige Plus format what DC do now with Black Label. And that was like the kickstart for the New Mutants. So this team was completely new. This came out at a time when the X-Men were at the height. In the mid-80s, the X-Men were untouchable. I think the only other comic that came close was DC's New Teen Titans by Marv Wolfman and George Perez. So this was the first spin-off from the X-Men that they introduced, was New Mutants. And when it came out, it blew my mind because I was a huge X-Men comic fan at the time. So I was seeing all the house ads for the New Mutants, and it looked really exciting because the thing that was different was, pardon me, was that the New Mutants were younger than the X-Men. They were teenagers like me, and they all had the uniform and they were at the school. Yeah, it was just like a really fresh take. And this is where they first came to prominence. And when they first got exposure was in this team up issue with Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. And it was actually with Frank Miller doing the artwork on that one. Don't do recordings when you're a bit tipsy. So it was before Frank Miller made a name for himself. That was back in the, I think it was 81, 82. And then there was the graphic novel I was mentioning. And for me, Bob McLeod I'd never seen an artist like him. He gave me the same kind of vibes what I used to get from Mike Zeck. He had this particular style what just gelled with me. And of course, it then led into the comic. I think I missed the first two issues when it first came out because I used to get my comics from the newsagents back in the early 80s before. I think it was just before I was old enough to like venture out, before I discovered comic shops. So I think I missed the first. I think I got on board with issue 3 and then I filled in the gaps later on. So that was issue 1. Like I said, I did eventually get that. And yeah, it just clicks with me. So this comic, as well, New Teen Titans are the two comics from the 80s. Forget the Watchmen, forget Swamp Thing and that lot, which I love. These were the two New Mutants and New Teen Titans were two American comics that really spoke to me as a teenager back in the 80s. And they were the ones that I collected religiously, month to month. And Bob McLeod's artwork just blew me away. I'd never seen any artwork like before. And looking at it now, it's quite dated, but at the time it had that same kind of impact, I guess, that Neil Adams had on a lot of young people in the 70s, 60s and 70s. But yeah, it was just something about them. I think it was being in a school, being having the same, all wearing the same uniform. I mean, like especially how Bob McLeod drew them. Like Cannonball wasn't. It was just a farmhand who was lanky. He wasn't particularly good looking. Ran Sinclair was the Scottish girl. Again, they were just average looking kids. They were not like film stars. Like the mutants had ended up becoming like these perfect looking people, but there's something slightly different about them. They're much more relatable. And even now, just looking through it now, I'm still getting that kind of feel. I know this is the next. I've finished doing all my comic reviews, so this is the next comic that I'll be reading, and I most likely might give like a review of it, see if it stands the test of time. So you had Ran Sinclair, who was Wolfsbane. You had Cannonball, who was Sam Guthrie. You had Danielle Morningstar, who was Psyche. And then you had Roberto DaCosta Sunspot, who was Brazilian, I think. So I had really. That's what for old Chris Claremont's Verbiosity. One thing he was really good at was promoting other cultures to kids. So it wasn't just American kids; it was kids from all over. And yeah, his verbose and it was like he loved. Chris Claremont loves fitting 50 words in instead of just using two. But at that age, it didn't matter. You're getting value for money. You're buying a 22 page comic, and you're getting lots of story in it. So yeah, so for me, I couldn't have asked for anything more. So this is my dream team. It just made the X-Men seem more grounded, more relatable. Because at the time of the 80s, the X-Men were all like in the 20s, apart from Kitty Pryde. So I jumped on this. I followed this. I think I collected this all the way through to the end, I think. To when Liefeld came on. I was just a little bit older than a lot of people who got to the Liefeld thing. I liked Rob Liefeld when he was on Hawk and Dove. And I initially liked him on New Mutants, but I kind of like fell off the Liefeld fan base when it switched to X-Force. I think that's when I realised that he was a bit shit, really. But there we go. I know a lot of people have fond memories of him. But yeah, I do recommend, if you're from the 80s, you'll enjoy it. I think you'll get a buzz from it. If you're not, it's a good historical document of what was peak superhero comics at that time. It still reads very well, and I think for Claremont's comic especially, he tamed down his writing quite a bit in this. It wasn't as grandiose or as flabby as the X-Men comics. But yeah, just really, really good. And there's another character introduced later on, Magma. And they go to this, which only Chris Claremont does, where they go to this place where it's still like Roman times, but in present day. Yeah, it had your typical everything you wanted from Claremont mutant comic. He had soap opera elements, infighting, bitching with each other, falling out with each other, family problems, feeling like an outsider, nobody understands you. So I had all the angst what as a teenager I just soaked up. And then later on it has a miniseries which is Magic, which is the miniseries focusing on Ileana. I wish they just kept it to New Mutants, not... That's one thing I really hate about Marvel. See, I'm going to bash Marvel. One thing I hate about Marvel is when they do the epics and the omnibuses, they don't just have the pure runs of the comics. They have the miniseries, even though they don't really tie in that much. It's just filler. It's just so they can get more, print more books, and charge you more. So with this one, there's the Magic backup. I'm not too fussed about this, to be honest. I'd rather them just had another 6 issues of New Mutants in here. So yes, I've got this. I'm going to get them as and when I can, when I find them for a good price. Obviously, the next two will lead into the um, Bill Sienkiewicz period. So can't wait for them. When I read those back in the day, it took me about 3 or 4 years to get into Bill Sienkiewicz. Bill Sienkiewicz. Bill Sienkiewicz. Sienkiewicz. Um, because he was just so out there. I'd never seen anything like him. So I kind of appreciated him 3 or 4 years later on when I was about 19, something like that. But yeah, I can't wait to read those as an adult. As a grown up. So yeah, so so I'll be buying those next. I think the next one I'll be getting though will be the Wheezy Simonson ones, the Louise Simonson ones, with Brett Blevins because they're readily available. Um, the Bill Sienkiewicz ones they're being reprinted, so I'll get those as and when they're available. Okay, so this is my little blast from the 80s, a little bit about me, about what I used to love growing up in the 80s, which was the New Mutants. And I do recommend it to read. I'll give another 80. I think I'll do another blast from the 80s in the next few weeks. I've got one in mind, but I need to read it first, just see if it is as good as I remember it. Okay, bye. Bye.